This is Green Talk 8, our final one for fall 21 semester. Today, our topic is Global Team Collaboration for Climate Innovation. We have with us Val Bath, John Leih, one of our instructors, and Emma Wiessburg. I will turn the floor over to them. They can introduce themselves and tell you about what they do. They are representing Cultural Business Consulting, and they'll tell you more about that too. So thank you, guests, and thanks, students. We'll begin now.
Thank you, Barbara. We appreciate the invitation to speak at your event. I started CBC Cultural Business Consulting about 15 years ago to train and coach employees of multinational global companies to work more effectively across cultures. And I realized that this was a need after working for Texas Instruments Semiconductor, not only in the US, but in Asia, Southeast Asia, and many other countries. And then I had the opportunity to live and work in London, work in several different European countries. And that's where I realized this important need for cultural fluency. And this year, we had the opportunity to work and guide a growing green company, a climate company on the West Coast. As they were expanding globally, they realized that they had many needs to communicate effectively across cultures and work effectively. So the company also works with global organizations around the world to help them achieve renewable energy and decarbonization goals. And so with that, I'd like to introduce John Leih, who also worked with me on this particular client. John?
All right. Thank you, Val. It is such a pleasure to be presenting today with Val and with Emma. Val and I began on this path of cross-cultural organizational work all the way back in 2003, and that's when I first joined San Jose State. And so it's been for me sort of a threaded path doing both organizational consulting work and especially in the last 5 years with Val. And it's been very exciting to see that work increasingly include climate organizations, environmental organizations that are wrestling with the issue that we are going to be talking about today of the importance of team collaboration to be able to be successful in some of these global climate initiatives that are really a focus this week with the Global Climate Summit in Glasgow, UK. So I'll turn it over to Emma, who is also our close colleague, and we are really appreciating her presence with CBC. I'll turn it over to you, Emma.
Thanks, John. My name is Emma Wiessburg, and I work with Val as a cross-cultural consultant for Cultural Business Consulting. And I have experience studying in Belgium and Australia, and my most recent work experience abroad was in international higher education and corporate training in Tokyo. So I'm happy to be here presenting with Val and John today. Thanks for having us.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so I want to just bring everybody on board with a big invitation to learning today. And what is interesting is that the very challenges, team collaboration challenges that we are going to talk with you about today, our experience working with Bay Area organizations that are going global, are the same kind of challenges that are coming up in your final project research design teams. And sometimes those little differences in preferences or expectations can make a big difference in how successful the team is. So today, what we're going to do is look at some of the differences in preferences that can create issues on teams and sometimes can block their progress forward, how to resolve some of the disagreements, hopefully mild, between members of the team. How can we come to common ground rules, common understanding, in order for the team to be successful. And we're calling that a team operating agreement. It's a team charter that you construct that identifies potential areas of conflict before they become a big issue and enables you to plan what are the norms we can live by that will allow us to do our best work together. And of course, we're going to be applying this to the issue of climate innovation. There's so much on the table right now in Glasgow. Last month in Milan, it was the Youth Climate Conference, and it was very much teams like what you guys are doing in your classes. They were in Milan working out what proposals will we bring to Glasgow. So it's a very exciting time for the kind of connections that this class is making between engineering and environmental science. I'm going to now turn it over to my colleague Val, who has a surprise inside a box that she is bringing, and she's going to tell you a little bit more about what might be inside that box.
Okay, thank you, John. So to work effectively in a multicultural environment, there are two things, two keys, and there are two items in this box, and I'm not going to reveal to you yet what they are. I'd like for you to guess that what is so important for global team collaboration. And I'd like for you to put in the chat a few guesses before I reveal what these two things are. So take a guess. What do you think might be in this box?
All right, let's see it coming in on the chat. Some guesses to make this guessing game. Wow, there we go.
Computers, pencils, coffee and tea.
So funny. Two people. Oh my.
Ooh, I saw open-mindedness, transparency.
The transparency is good. Microphone. What else? A pen and a sword. Ooh. Paper clips.
Lots of
Self-awareness, open-mindedness.
Ooh, self-awareness. Now
that's close. Self-awareness is close.
But they are objects.
Yeah, what do you think is, that's a good, that self-awareness. Now think about a physical object that's in this box, not just the word that would represent that.
Ooh.
Oh, Samantha.
We got one.
What is our prize, Emma?
Yes, Samantha gets the first object. Okay, so she guessed a mirror, which is very true. And someone guessed self-awareness. And so that's right. So understanding yourself, your own culture, your own work styles, your own communication styles. That's the first thing. Now there's one other object in this box. Can you guess what it would be? Let's see. Anyone else?
Oh, nice job, Christian too. Christian guessed mirror also.
Yeah, I think I saw someone a magnifying glass.
DJ is also getting warm.
Magnifying glass is close.
Yes. The
Glasses.
Magnifying glass. Glasses. Okay. John, should I reveal?
Lenses. Microscope.
These are good.
That's close.
Very close. Okay.
Yes. Oh, CJ came
binoculars.
around. CJ was on the track, and both of those actually.
Yeah.
Darren also is pretty close.
Okay, I think I'm going to reveal it now because that was very close. Here we go. You're right. So binoculars, yes. So the telescope, those absolutely. So to understand others, right? So first we understand we have our self-awareness, and the second is to understand others and we have to take a closer look. Okay. So with that, thank you. Thanks for playing our game. And
nicely done. I mean, Val, the companies we've worked with have not done as well as that.
I agree. Well done, everyone. Very good. Very good. We do this in our sessions. So nice job. So I'll pass it over to John to tell you a little bit about the youth conference in Milan, Italy.
Yeah, and also building on these two objects that came out of the box by
Yes.
surprise. There's that idea of understanding yourself, understanding what makes you tick, what makes you a good contributor to a team. What is it that shuts you down? What is it that blocks you? All of that is what the mirror implies, right? And then the binoculars, or maybe even better, what Darren said with the telescope, increasingly engineers are having to look a long geographical distance away to find the colleague engineers that they are on a team with. You may find yourself on a team with people located in Bangalore, India, and Berlin, Germany, and you're here in San Jose, and you need to collaborate effectively. And so this dynamic, it's interesting. We're experiencing it in miniature in our final project teams. Val and I and Emma, when we work with local Bay Area startups that are going global quickly, they're having to look at this issue of how well do we understand our own style? How well do we understand the preferences and expectations of people far, far away if we're working with them on a team regularly? And then finally, the level that we're at with what's happening this month with global climate is that it's kind of a big, giant mashup of all the cultures of the world trying to solve the climate crisis by getting together in one city. I was reading that there are more than 1,000 city representatives, and I believe that includes our own San Jose mayor in Glasgow. So the city element, the youth element of groups of young people going to Milan and Glasgow, but even if you're not going, we're sending out some material so you can get a little closer to this. This happened in September. And of course, we have there Greta Thunberg, as well as Vanessa Nakate, Greta from Sweden, Vanessa from Uganda. And what are they worried about? They're worried about a number that the whole world is focusing on right now. Does anybody want to guess in the chat what's the number that has everybody worried? So that number is 1.5. And we've gotten this from Eugene Cordero's talk. We built on this with the Citizens Climate Lobby talk. Mandeep Kara, I don't remember if he stated the number, but he certainly referred to the dilemma. The world is very concerned, well, young people, Greta and Vanessa, are very concerned that if the temperature rises more than 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is how much Fahrenheit, by the way, because here we are in San Jose. Unless you're in the chemistry lab, you're probably not using Celsius. How many degrees? So 2 degrees Celsius. Yeah, it's actually a little 2.7, but so getting close to 3 degrees. And that's the number that we're worried about, right? Because planetary systems start to have major problems for both humans and other living organisms. And so what we are going to look at, though, is as these young people come on board, they're organizing, they're trying to put proposals on the table, they're trying to activate leadership to take some tough decisions. They've got to be able to communicate well, and they've got to be able to collaborate really well on teams. And that's what Val and Emma and I have been seeing with the clients that we work with, that even highly trained people, professionals, are struggling with this too, how to collaborate effectively, especially when we're going across boundaries. So Emma, can I see the next slide? So we worked with an organization based here in the Bay Area, but they actually have a presence along the West Coast, all the way up to Vancouver and Portland. And but what they are is a climate carbon trading company. And so basically what that means is if we put a cap on the amount of carbon companies can produce, and this is happening much more in Europe right now, although this is what's being discussed, we put a cap, then companies will need to pay if they pass that cap, and that money will go to very carefully monitored projects of renewable energy, solar and wind, in places like Vietnam and Argentina. So this Bay Area-based company is all of a sudden needing to one day talk with Norway and the next day talk with Argentina or Vietnam, or work closely with teams and develop trust. So these are some of the issues when we began to work with them and were doing our needs assessment, that some of the rules and processes were not clear enough to go global so quickly. Were different understandings of time. And I think all of our teams, the teams that you're on right now, can relate to that, right? You have a Gantt chart, but what happens if you miss a Gantt chart deadline? What's the norm? Do you have to send a text to everybody on the team immediately? Or do you just tell everybody later? These are the kinds of things that create a lot of disjointedness, a lot of inefficiency, and ultimately it reduces the amount of trust. And when people have really different communication styles, it can actually block the common mission that they all share and they're trying to work towards. So I'm going to now turn it over to Val, who's going to dig a little bit deeper into a particular kind of difference that can create a lot of issues on team effectiveness. So Val?
Yes, it can. Thanks, John. One of the communication style differences that our client, as well as many other clients, struggle with and learn through our training is the idea of some individuals communicate in a more direct way while others communicate more indirectly. And so the direct communicators want to get from point A to point B as quick as possible, very explicit, even when handling disagreements or potential conflict. And when it comes to conflict or disagreement on an indirect communicator, it's more about using more implicit modes to resolve a conflict or communicate and maybe even avoid it. And sometimes the communication can start out with more information, background information, my opinion, your opinion, before getting to point B, the ending result or the meaning of the message. Okay, and when we look at the next slide, when we look at some of the generalizations around national cultures, the research has shown that we have many direct communicators that are in the US and some Northern European countries, as you can see. These are some of the more direct communicators when we're looking from a global mindset. And then as far as indirect communicators, as John mentioned, our client has clients and employees in Argentina, Vietnam, but you can see Mexico, Asia, Latin America, more indirect communicators, okay? Now, what happens when multicultural teams work together and there could be a conflict involved or disagreement, there's perceptions that happen. And some of those negative perceptions that we see would be a direct communicator will perceive the indirect communicator as maybe hiding something or not getting to the point very quickly. And the worst and absolutely worst case is that they're untruthful or dishonest, or there's a lack of integrity when there really is not, okay? And sometimes it's more of just this style of communicating, okay? And then the opposite, when you take a look at the perceptions from an indirect communicator of a direct, well, they're just rude, they're too aggressive, and they don't care about my feelings or want to really even build a relationship because they're very task focused too. And so when you think about the goals, both want to maintain good relationships, but the direct communicators are focused on saving time, and the indirect are more focused on saving face and protecting feelings. Okay, not getting someone upset, creating and maintaining harmony in a group or between two people. So what do we do? How can we change? And so if you're thinking about working effectively, we call it flexing or style stretching in certain situations that we're in. And to be able to do this is really part of being an effective team member. And so if you're more direct, now think about your team that you're currently in and with others, if you're more direct, you might want to try asking more open-ended questions than yes/no questions. Let me give you an example. Instead of saying, will your part of the project be completed on Monday? That's a yes/no question. Perhaps maybe ask, when do you expect your part to be ready? And then that's a question where they can give you an estimate or talk about maybe some problems or challenges they might be having, okay? And so again, as a direct communicator, you need to listen for what's not being said. And the skill of paraphrasing, checking for understanding is very key for the direct communicators to do. And then also focus on the relationship, especially at the beginning and then throughout, instead of just jumping in, to a difficult topic or the task. Build some relationship. Maybe it's a few minutes of just talking and getting to know someone, or maybe it's taking them, and going for lunch, or having a virtual, tea or something online that you can do. And then, so if you're the more indirect communicator, what can you do to flex? And what we've noticed is that the indirect communicators really are about relationships, and they just don't like saying no, and especially in a conflict or disagreement. Okay, and so if you could practice with the direct communicators saying no, and then don't say yes when you disagree. Okay, so there's this really tendency to want to agree, want to keep things very positive. And then don't be offended when someone who's more direct, shares their thoughts very bluntly. Don't take that as a personal offense, because the direct communicators can be perceived in that way, as we mentioned. So let's talk about flexing and changing. There is a model that we use in our training and coaching called the 4 C's. And as you can see, there's calculate, choose, change, and create. We used this model with our West Coast client and others. And what we did is the first C, calculate, we used an online a cultural self-assessment. It's kind of like the mirror to understand yourself and what your cultural preferences, work styles, attitudes, and beliefs are, and then compared those to others on the team. And from there, we looked at what are some of those out of 16 different variables of culture. One of them would be direct and indirect. We then we went into step 2, which is choose. And we would choose which ones are negotiable and which ones are non-negotiable. Or maybe there are some where they're negotiable in some situations and non-negotiable in others. The context, it varies. Okay, so we had a discussion about those. And then moving to steps 3 and 4, change and create. The change is what I talked about previously, is where can you flex your style and work more effectively in your teams and collaborations. So for me, an example, I'm very direct in my communication. That's my natural style based on my background. And I've learned to work and flex my style to ask more open-ended questions, build relationships, and really do more of what I can to paraphrase, check for understanding, and change in those ways. And then there's some situations where direct and indirectness, it can be a strength. It can be a strength of mine. And so there's situations where that's a non-negotiable too, where it's more of, okay, step 4 is create. And that's where the team needs to come together and create these cultural alliances for their non-negotiable variables. And, I believe that it's important to embrace the unique strengths of diverse individuals on your team and utilize those strengths. And that's one of the things that we like to emphasize. Where and how can everyone do their best work? With our client, we walk them through a team operating agreement. This is a way to come up with norms and best practices for a team to work effectively and create an effective work team that collaborates well. And so John is going to explain a little bit more about the team operating agreement.
Okay, thank you, Val. So we have sent out an article that Emma and I worked on together that documents a little bit of our experience with this West Coast organization, because a lot of the issues that we've talked about that could be going on in your teams, they were definitely wrestling with too. And I'm going to give you a quick example and fit it into this model where it's important that mirror aspect of understanding oneself, and then understanding that different members of the team could have very different styles, especially when we're using those binoculars and going across continents. And sometimes it escalates up the organization too, that there's a need to develop a new kind of agreement for the whole organization, especially if it's a West Coast organization like the one we worked with that's suddenly needing to communicate with Norway and Argentina and Vietnam. And not just communicate, but collaborate closely and trust over a long period of time. So I will share with you one interesting incident, because when we worked with this company, we did also work with their technical support people. And a new person had been onboarded in Norway and was working with the Portland-based technical support. And so both of these individuals were working things out according to their own style. And so the very skillful technical support guy was listening to the problem that the new Norwegian employee had, and it was my keyboard needs to be adapted to a Norwegian keyboard because it doesn't work. And so he said, just send it over to me, Amazon Direct or whatever, and I'm working in my garage, I'll retrofit it for you. So he did that, but he ran into more problems than he expected. And so the Norwegian guy, also a pretty direct guy and fairly informal, just circumvented the whole thing and said, I'm just going to go down the street and get my keyboard fixed, and I'll pay cash out of my pocket, and let's hope I get reimbursed. Well, you can imagine if a company is expanding very quickly and onboarding lots of new both technical people and other kinds of professionals, and everybody's paying out of pocket and then going and trying to get reimbursed, that could be a total mess. And so we also had in our program the IT support manager. And it turns out that he had a little bit of an indirect style, and it was surfacing that they really needed to have a way for the new people to have a corporate credit card, to go purchase the services they needed. But this was slowed down because there was a lot of indirect, there were, emails sent, but then not necessarily followed up on. And it ended up being that people were just handling things ad hoc. This is why a team operating agreement is so needed, especially when a company is going global or when a team is trying to operate across a lot of borders. Norms are needed, ground rules, systems, infrastructure. And so this is something you can begin to think about with these two central circles, right? You're an individual embedded on a team of 4. I'm sure you've recognized that not everybody thinks like you, and therefore you have to work with that. But the important thing is, don't just ignore that. It's important to actually bring those issues to the surface. What happens if someone gets sick or someone has a family emergency? They know they're not going to meet the deadline. What must they do at a minimum to communicate with the team? That would be one example. And also, later when you're on a team with a larger organization, you're going to see that these are puzzle pieces that fit into each other, that working well on the team then has to go up to the organizational level. So we're going to give you some tools for this. We're actually going to give you a worksheet called the Team Operating Agreement Worksheet. But even more interesting, we're going to give you a chance very soon to practice for yourself how this would look. And if we can go to the next slide, I'm just going to give you a few ideas about some of the areas to consider or why a team operating agreement is so important. it's important to create a foundation of building trust with the people on your team. And that trust, even if you're only working for your team for 6 weeks, it's going to pay off when you're getting into those 11th hour situations on your project. You're presenting 2 days from now. That trust that you created at the beginning is going to allow you to work effectively under pressure. And the idea is to not just assume that other people should do things a certain way, but talk with them in advance about what everyone is expecting. And you see some other reasons why a team operating agreement can be so effective. We're hoping that you in your classes will fully take advantage of this, but we're going to do a little pilot of this right here, right now. And for that, I'm going to turn you over to my colleague, Emma.
Okay, thank you, John. So in a moment, we're going to break out into breakout rooms for about 10 minutes. You'll be in groups of 4 to 5 people. And before you go into this group, or while you're in the group, I'd like you to think and reflect on one specific communication challenge that you have been experiencing in your team. So we would like to focus this communication challenge on the direct, indirect communication style. So think now and reflect on what kind of communication issues or misunderstandings you've been having within your team, and then report this to your breakout group. So your breakout group won't be with your team, it'll be random groups, but I'd like you to look at this breakout room as a safe space to share what you've been experiencing and to help each other and guide each other through those misunderstandings. So you can use these questions on the screen to guide each other through your miscommunications in your teams. The first question is, what are you willing to change in order to collaborate effectively? So that's the flex piece that Val was talking about. And then also, what do you want others to change? So this is the binoculars piece, looking outward. What can someone else change to make the communication more seamless? So, and also please keep in mind that it's a safe space. So the details and the names of what's said in the room, please leave that in the breakout room and let's keep it confidential. But what's learned from that room can absolutely leave the room. And we'll ask you to report back on what you learned and the breakthroughs during this conversation. So please also come back to the main session with a couple takeaways to share with the group.
So Emma, I just want to add, we will be circulating, so we'll be listening in a little bit and trying to assist. But I think it's very important at the beginning to set a focus. Think about the team you're on right now. Think of the people who are being perhaps more direct, or other team members who are not, there's some negative issue that comes up, a family emergency or a missed deadline, and they're not being direct. But we want you to share a brief story of where your team is getting stuck, and then go to those 2 questions that Emma is talking about. What in that situation where one is direct and one is indirect, what kinds of team ground rules could you have, and what are you willing to change? What do you want them to change? And Emma is going to be debriefing all of this when we come back.
Yes, and if you have any questions about what you're meant to be doing in the breakout room, feel free to write it in the chat as well. But I will create the rooms now, and you can go ahead and join when you're ready.
Oh, Emma, I've got the rooms created. So.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah. So if you want me to open them now, it looks like we have 22 rooms with at least 4 to 5 people in each room. Maybe some 6.
It looks like some people are already joining the rooms. Is it okay to continue with the ones that I have open?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Who's timing? Emma, are you timing, or is Barbara
Yes,
timing?
I've got time.
Okay, great. Thank you both.
It looks like we still have a few students who have not joined their breakout rooms. Please join your breakout room.
to transition to talking about the specific strategies you discussed in your breakout rooms for improving team collaboration that you can bring back to your team next week. So just to kind of get the ball rolling in my group, there was one kind of common misunderstanding that Trent, Christian, Andrew, and I spoke about, and that is that many of their team members are very indirect in the way that they communicate. So we discussed how they, as the team leaders, have flexed their style to meet them halfway and maybe delegate a bit more, but there's still a need to kind of take out the binoculars and help on the other side to meet more halfway. Were there any other takeaways that you wanted to share? Either probably in the chat will be easiest, and then we can address it from there.
Yeah, and Emma, I'm thinking if they do share, if they can give us an idea of what was the difference or the conflict, and maybe a little bit of that question of what changes could be made on either side.
Mm-hmm.
I see Ahab would like to speak it. So Ahab, absolutely, you have the floor.
So related to the question, there's a class that I was taking, and we're in a group, and we have equal distribution of work, but they weren't doing the work. So for number one, I could say I'm like really flexible in helping people do what they need. If people want to take on some more work, I'll let them do that. If they need help doing some work, I'll let them do that, or I'll do that for them. So the person wasn't doing the work, and I figured, okay, this is, BS. I'm gonna call them out on it and see what's going on. And so we figured out what their situation was, and from that we were able to, help them out, because the simplest scenario is they're working a 9-to-5 job, so they don't really have that much time to commit to the assignment. So what we're doing as a team is we're helping them get their work done while they're doing their job, right?
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting example. And you didn't know that backstory until you started asking open questions, right?
Yeah, and in our talk in the breakout room, there was a similar scenario with another person in our group, where they were not doing work in their group, but the people in their team didn't really call them out on it and just let it be. So
very interesting two examples, right? Because the background issue is, one thing is style differences in communication. Another thing is what you're saying, like the word, actual negligence, which is a different issue, right? It's so important, that's more in the ethical domain of things, right? Where, okay, you committed to work, you didn't do it. That's not a cultural style thing. That's an ethical issue. And it's so important to understand the difference. But how you respond to it is where some communication savvy comes in. The first example that you gave, you might have exploded at that person. You're not doing your work, and then the whole thing goes down and down. It's impossible to collaborate with this person because now they're upset, you're upset, everything's overheated. But I heard a lot of skillfulness there. Just find out what's going on and then try to come to a new team agreement of what is the minimum that we need from you or that you're expecting from us, and make sure that everyone comes to a real agreement about that. It just doesn't happen randomly. Say a little more, Ahab, about that second example. And I want Emma also to weigh in here because it's really her debrief, but maybe you can call on who you want to respond, Emma, because I don't want to take it away.
No, I think that was great. And I think that's a common issue that especially students experience, because you need to balance so much. But I do think it's a fine line between negligence, like what John said, and simply not doing the work, and then working through different communication styles. So I think first, once those two are identified and separated, then you can proceed accordingly with each. And then in the next slide, we'll go over some takeaways that you can implement for the stylistic challenges that you're experiencing as well.
Really great example, Ahab. What about that? Can you tell us, just refresh us that second example that was kind of an opposite example?
So the second example was a person in our group meet was saying that their group had a person that wasn't doing work. And instead of, having an intervention or asking what was going on, they just let it be and they decided to take on the work without knowing.
Yeah. And you can see where the ethical relationships on the team can get completely messed up by not having clear communication. And that backing away, this is what people are doing all the time. They're just like, it's too hot, don't want to touch it, or it's too difficult. And then team effectiveness just goes down and down, which is why these team operating agreements from the outset, what are the minimal expectations that we all have of each other that we can all commit to? But really cool that you brought up both of those examples, because I think that's really the reality of teamwork, right? Where how do we get a situation? It also brings up issues of equity and equality, which I know Emma has a big interest in. Yeah, do we, how much do people need special support because of the circumstances they're dealing with? And that absolutely has its place. But then, the team as a whole may have some feelings about equal sharing of the load, especially when it's sharing of a grade that have to be accounted for too. Yeah. So thank you, Ahab, for that.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Any other takeaways that anyone would like to share in the chat? Or
Marius has one, it looks like. Do you want to field that, Emma?
Sorry, who is that?
Marius in the chat.
Oh, I see Marius now. Let's see. Marius says, having a team leader that is understanding, positive, and organized is important. Also, everyone should agree on the importance of the task, the group project. Absolutely. I think just as understanding the personal context of each of your team members, understanding the prioritization of each task is also important, because different individuals will place different emphasis on what they think should be done first or how they think things should be done. So I think prioritization of your tasks is really equally important to be discussed in the very beginning and really throughout, checking in throughout, working with your team to make sure you're all following up on what you need. But yeah, having a team leader that's understanding, positive, and organized, I think is always a great and important thing.
Yeah, Emma, it brings to mind a program that I did with Val a number of years ago. It was between Spanish engineers and Indian engineers. And one of the Spanish engineers was a female engineer. And she said, what this material is teaching me is that in the future, we need a new kind of leader for the digital situation, a new kind of team leader. And I think that can be an inspiration to all of us, right? Is that all of us are trying to grow into a new way of leading when a lot of our work is virtual, but it's also now hybrid, where we might be in person, we might be virtual, we need to dance between the two. A lot of challenges. It requires a new kind of leader. You guys are becoming those kinds of leaders.
Definitely. And so, yeah, there's flexing in between your different cultural styles, and then also flexing from in-person to online. There's lots of different kinds of code switching and flexing that we have to practice on a regular basis. And I think acknowledging it and being conscious of it is definitely the first step to doing it effectively.
Val, any thoughts there, or is somebody else want to weigh in with us in the chat? It looks like Brandon.
So Brandon says, each member could categorize themselves as indirect or direct communicators and can work towards changing the way they communicate with the counterpart communicators to understand each other and be on the same page. As in, how can you change slide? Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. That's exactly what Val and I do in our culture mastery course.
Good. I like that. Excellent. Yeah, and speaking of communication, in my group, we talked about the challenge of meeting and waiting until the last minute to complete everything the day before it's due. And then also when schedule is just trying to get everyone scheduled. But one person that was communicating was only communicating via text and not, speaking in words. And so you have this virtual environment, and and how do you want them to change, right? And that would be one of, okay, maybe they're in a noisy coffee shop and then they can only text, but maybe they could find a quiet place, to so they can speak and talk. And also, we talk about virtual communication, the challenge of working in a virtual environment, and it is important when you're on your team to see people. So we encourage people to leave their audios on, leave their videos on, and communicate, because 80% of the communication is nonverbal. It's not just a matter of what you're saying, but how you're saying it, and some of your expressions, and especially across cultures, it's key, that we advise. It's important to do that.
And kudos to Ahab for taking it to heart.
Yes, Ahab, thanks.
Thank you.
All right. So with that, I think I'll transition to you, Val, for our final recommendations.
Yes, there are 10 of those, but you can read through the list. But like I said, working virtually in this environment, when you meet, if you can create an agenda. Meetings are effective if they're well planned, well structured, well facilitated, and you get the things done that you need to get done. That's important, and that people participate. And the more participation, then you get your team members more involved. And the other thing would be to build those relationships. Number 4, I know people are busy, but like I said, trying to create that, those working relationships and even friendships. Many people do make friends, by working together and on these projects. And don't be afraid to ask for help. And you can see some of the other ones that we recommend, and you can try to keep your meetings short and just, effective as well. And maybe, meeting in shorter, shorter periods of time if possible. But I know it's a challenge we had some who are working and taking classes. And so, working it through those schedules ahead of time is key, important. Okay.
So with that, I think we can transition to our Q&A.
With Bonnie.
Oh, and we already have one hand raised from Malcolm. Malcolm, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering if you guys could address diversity at CBC. Considering that you guys are cross-cultural experts, I was a little surprised that we only heard from white American presenters.
Oh, very good. Yeah, well, time zone is one thing. We have an office and a team in Mumbai, but right now it's later in their evening, and so that's a challenge. And we do have teams in Europe and in the UK as well. But again, I think it has a lot to do with time zone. But maybe next time I'll get them to stay up later so that they'll join us on the call. But good question.
And that's actually been something that we've kind of been reevaluating in some of the training content that we deliver as well, because while intercultural and global collaboration is a very, of course, global matter, in America, we're talking about DEI right now, and that is incredibly valid and something that we're very mindful of. And it's also a matter of just kind of communicating that on the global scale. And we use our subject location experts for those requests and things like that, so as not to impose our own thoughts or judgments.
Understood.
Yeah, I think, Emma, that last point is really spot on, that, we're not going to be posing as experts for a region that we don't know well, and therefore bringing in people from those places is a big part of the program design.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
And that's definitely US as well. We're not just talking about other parts of the world, but the integrating people from all backgrounds into the program designs is part of what it's definitely our goal.
Yeah, and most of our trainings, we do conduct trainings with multicultural teams in somewhat the same time zones. In many cases, we have Eastern US and Europe, which is early morning our time. I mean, tomorrow I have a session that starts at 6:30 Pacific for that particular time region. And then we also deliver in our evenings when we conduct our China programs. And, and they're very diverse. You would think we conducted a session with Japan and China, not only Hong Kong and Shanghai, on some of the cultural differences between those three countries and cultures. Okay, so, but many of our sessions are multicultural.
Emma, Bonnie has a request that we clarify DEI. Would you be willing to take that on?
DEI, like what DEI means?
Yes.
So DEI means diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this kind of embodies the race, religion, sex, gender, sexual orientation, all of these different minority typically understood as diversity topics. DEI encapsulates all of these and kind of not only acknowledges it, but also reflects how organizations and institutions can be mindful and actively engage these different minority populations to bring innovation and new ideas and profitability and mutual understanding to the organization internally and also all of its stakeholders. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
So, okay, perfect. And then I see Marius wrote a question in the chat. What are the
We have a
people?
hand raised. Can we take the hand raised first, please?
Oh, yeah, that's fine. Alicia?
It's not a question. Just I saw on the slide. So do you think those who are inclined to direct communication turns out to be more like a leader, and then those with the indirect one like a facilitators of the within the group?
What a great question.
That is a good question.
I saw it in the slide and saw the felt like that. Not a question though.
Val, you must have the answer.
I do. And the situation is it depends on the culture. There are many effective indirect leaders. They typically are not in the US unless that organizational culture is more indirect and you have more of that style of communication. So I would say in many countries, such as Japan, a very effective leader is an indirect one. But you have to really look at the organization and see what that organizational culture, what it looks like. Okay, so but great question.
And I think in general, where you land on any cultural dimension, direct, indirect, or multi-focus, single focus, there's no right or wrong. One is not better than the other. They're all just your style, and that's okay. It's like what Val says, it kind of defaults to the context you're working within.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I think now we can go to Marius's question because I don't see any other hands raised. So Marius asked, what are the people you are trying to educate on a general basis? Businesses, universities, startups, politicians?
So the answer is all three of those: businesses, multinational companies, universities, startups, and we have not had the opportunity to train and educate politicians, but I think that would be a really good area to work in for sure. So yes.
Any other questions or raised hands?
So Emma, maybe we could talk about the follow-up with the team operating agreement that we're providing instructors with. Would that be possible?
Yeah, of course. So I think the instructors already have the team operating agreement. And this is a resource, a living editable document that you can go through with your team members to kind of set guidelines and really just create a mutual understanding of how you'd like to work together or continue working together. So it goes through a bunch of different kind of facets of that's involved of working with a team. So how you want to structure meetings, how what else did we put on there? Meetings, how like the kind of personal context that you want to provide for your team members to understand your situation. And as you're completing those team operating agreement worksheets with your team, I'd also just encourage you to be very mindful of the personal context that your team members are working within, because it will look very different from yours. And it's important to not make assumptions or expectations of what or how you think things should be done, but have that as an open and fluid conversation and an ongoing conversation to be revisited with your team throughout your time working with them.
Absolutely. Yeah, so it's kind of a jumping off. What we just did in the breakouts is a practice of what we'd like you to take further as you create ground rules for your team, which can be fairly simple, but various ground rules that would make sense for your group to do its best work. And we're glad to take any other questions. Bonnie, do you see anything else coming through?
No, I haven't seen anything else in the chat or any other hands raised. So students, this is your last call for questions.
Hey, I had another question. So next week, we're likely going to have to, for this class, write a memorandum, and they usually are based on environmental situations. And I'm wondering if you guys have any ways that your organization impacts that for when I have to write this memo.
Yeah, so this is Marius, right? We've also sent out an article that Emma and I worked on together that documented our work with this environmental organization. So that could be some pretty good material, because it looks at the ways that they needed to sharpen up their team operating agreement as they went global with, it is a climate organization, and that's described in the article. So and it's going to be up to each instructor how they want to position what we've brought today, totally up to the instructor.
And Marius has his hand up.
Yes. Thanks, first of all, for answering the questions and giving this presentation today. I think it was really interesting. I particularly asked this question before about the companies. Because I have seen your cultural business consulting label before, because I worked for Airbus for 5 years, and I've been sent, since I'm originally from Germany, I've been sent to Mexico, and I just wanted to give a comment that when I worked during the time in Mexico, I ran exactly through those problems of direct and indirect communication, and I just wanted to give you guys the more like a positive critique, that I think this whole situation in companies is not taken serious enough, I think, because I've been working there for months and we ran into so many difficulties, and they were only because of the ways we communicate. These were the biggest issues that appeared. And I think that companies should take this topic more serious than they do right now, especially with the online platform. So that's more like a comment, not like a question. I just wanted to say that before we head out of here.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Marius, can that wonderful comment be accompanied by some way to contact you directly? Because that kind of perspective, I think we would really like to dialogue with.
Sorry, can you repeat what you said? It broke off for a second.
Would it be possible for you to put your email in the chat, and that way we can get in touch with you? Because it sounds like we could have a really interesting conversation about your experiences with Airbus.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. And we have done some work with Airbus in the past. So, but there's definitely more to be done.
Yeah, we agree with you.
Absolutely.
I sent it to Sean Leih. I think I can send it. I didn't want to put it for everyone, my email in there, so.
No worries.
Thanks. All right, Bonnie, thanks for helping us out with the whole Q&A. We're glad to stay on for what if anyone else would like to dialogue. Wonderful being able to share this with
Yeah.
Val and Emma.
Thank you very much for your presentation today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Great interaction with the students, and we learned so much, and we've got information that we can use right away in our classes. So thank you. Students who are still on, that pretty much wraps up our last Green Talk for Fall 21. Thank you. And we hope you continue to have a good rest of the semester.